Um, Connie Lown is unlike most of us, or certainly unlike myself, is a native of this area. She spent most of her professional career, not in Rhinebeck, however, but out in remote places like New Zealand in the hospitality industry and on the West Coast. And we're glad she's retired and she's back here in Rhinebeck. She has been a member of the Tree Commission here in Rhinebeck for a number of years, and also has been the head of our, over there behind the Star Library is the community garden. And Connie has been the head of that organization and is still participating as one of the members. And more importantly, with relevance to tonight's program, she has and is a member of the Friends of the Rhinebeck Cemetery. Friends of the Rhinebeck Cemetery is a very important organization that does a lot of the grunt work and a lot of the fundraising and seeking of volunteers that allow the cemetery to be what it is. Our focus this evening, not our focus, Connie's focus, is on a particular aspect of that cemetery, namely the gravestones, and what is it that's involved in taking care of those gravestones, making them look like they were originally intended to look like. The cemetery is very dependent on volunteers, and we're very fortunate not only that Connie and many others volunteer their time there, but in this case, that Connie is willing to share with us what's involved in keeping that place looking as good as it does.
Okay, good evening, everyone, and thank you for zooming in with us. Perhaps it's nicer being in your own warm homes this evening rather than having to have a cold drive to the Star Library, but we are sorry that we're not still not able to meet there in person. How I got involved in the gravestone cleaning, I've always enjoyed cemeteries and gravestones, old things. I don't know why, I can't explain that. But I read about a workshop that the Friends of the Rhinebeck Cemetery was participating in 2.5 years ago in May of 18. And it was a preservation workshop at a cemetery in Brooklyn. And I mentioned it to Beverly Kane, and she asked if I would like to attend. So I did, and I came back full of enthusiasm and wonder at how you could clean these nasty old gravestones. So this is actually a photograph taken at that workshop to show you that the stone in the background has not been cleaned, especially the top of it. So that was the condition of the two stones in the front. And then the participants at the workshop each claimed some stones to clean. And that's how nicely Mary Foote and John Little Moffat's gravestones cleaned up. So I came back just excited to show Beverly the photos of what could be done. Beverly then got the fever. She and I both went to a New York State chapter of the Association of Gravestone Studies annual conference in Danbury, Connecticut a few months later, and we learned more preservation and restoration techniques, and she got to see how the gravestone cleaning works. So here's Beverly all smiled with a half cleaned gravestone there.
Here's half cleaned.
This is the items that we use. The major ingredient is your D2 biological solution, and you can buy it online. I actually looked at Amazon.com today, and it says they're out of stock, but there is the local producer of it in Westport, Connecticut. But it is a biocide, so it doesn't hurt you. There's no bleach in it, doesn't hurt the grass or the ground that you're working around. And here are some basic tools that you use. Nylon brushes. These brushes are from the dollar store, so it's a very inexpensive fix. An old toothbrush. You can use a popsicle stick as well. The toothbrush and the popsicle stick are to get into like the lettering or any details on the stone that you need to get a little dig into that the brush isn't being effective on. And the yellow item in the foreground is a painter's or a plasterer's tool you get at the hardware store, again, to get in nooks and crannies, or maybe to scrape off some of the heavier lichen before you start the project. A natural bristle brush is also a very good thing. You do not use a wire brush. You do not use a power washer. No bleach, no ammonia, nothing harsh on stone. So just this biocide and a big pail of water and elbow grease, but you don't, it's not a strong elbow grease chore. In some of the restoration work, you'll see later, maybe use a crowbar. And this is a probe, a metal probe. If there's stones in the ground, or maybe a stone is broken off and you're trying to find the piece that's in the ground, you can gently prod the ground with the probe and help locate the stone. So the first project I got involved with Beverly, she and her husband Neil were going to clean this stone. This is the grave of Mary Regina Morton Miller, the founder of the Star Institute. And money was donated to the Friends of the Rhinebeck Cemetery with the stipulation that the funds be used to repair and restore the brick foundation of this grave. And so a person was hired by the cemetery to do that. So here's a picture of before. So you can see the stone is intact, laying on top. It's a tablet stone. And the foundation that it sits on has crumbled. When the stone was removed, this is what the foundation looked like. So the brick man did a nice job in restoring the stone. And Beverly and Neil Kane and my project was to clean the stone. So here's the stone laying up on boards on the ground. Beverly smiling away because this is the first cleaning we're doing in the cemetery. And there's a spray bottle full of water, your brushes, your D2, buckets of water. So very basic tools that you need. And here is Neil going to work on it. He has wet down the bottom half of the stone, sprayed water on it, then sprayed the biocide on it. This stone wasn't heavily coated with any kind of lichen, so we just waited a few minutes for it to start reacting. They recommend 10 to 15 minutes. And even on heavy lichen, it says just spray it heavily, walk away and leave it for 1 to 4 weeks and come back and see what it's done. We haven't tested that theory, but that might be an interesting test on some of the heavier lichen. So here Neil has done half the stone. You can see the before and after, the difference, how nicely the surface dirt and grime and mold has come off. And in this picture, you're seeing a little bit of green and brown on the stone. That's the biocide, the D2 reacting to the materials, the lichen in the stone. So once it dries, you don't see that color anymore. You kind of panic when you first do it and, oh, have I done something? But it's simply reacting and killing the lichen. So here's the stone cleaned up very nicely. There are some darker bits of black lichen that is hard to get off, but it cleaned up very nicely. And then it was replaced back on the base. So a nice finished project. So here's your before picture of what the stone looked like. Again, it wasn't terribly dirty, mostly around where water settles into the lettering because it's a flat stone. It is under a tree in the shade, but that's what it looks like before and after. And here it is a year later, 1.5 years later. So it's still looking very nice. So when we had a cleaning day, we didn't have a cleaning day. First, we had a preservation workshop with somebody we met at one of the conferences, and he came to show us again, the cleaning, but then more importantly, how to preserve some of the stones that had broken off, etc. So this is the oldest portion of the cemetery. It was, if you can see it, you drive in the cemetery off of Mill Road. Down that driveway, you can see the garage by the caretaker's cottage there is on the right side. So you get a sense that's the oldest portion of the cemetery. That was donated to the Methodist Church in 1832 by Katherine Livingston Garrison, the wife of freeborn Garrison. So no more people were going to be buried in the church, at the church in the village. And the first few sections of plots were purchased by her daughter, Mary Garretson, and freeborn Garretson, nephew of Catherine, not the minister, but the nephew. So we set about cleaning day. So here's Connie smiling at these stones, smiling because she knows they will clean up, while the people that participated with us were probably wondering if it really was going to happen. So we have some examples of stones that were cleaned before and after. This is Eliza Matilda Herbert. She died in 1810, a young age of 28. So in the left picture, you're seeing the water being sprayed onto the stone. After that, we're going to spray the bottle of D2, the biocide, let it react for a few minutes, and then start scrubbing with your scrub brush. And this is how beautiful that marble stone cleaned up. Another stone that was worked on was Elizabeth Morrison, the wife of Daniel Morrison. She was born in Wales, and they say about the year 1776. She died in 1833. So again, quite an old stone. You can see we start cleaning stones like this one, especially when they're that dirty. Start cleaning at the bottom. If you start cleaning at the top, your biocide is going to drip down the stone. So it's going to start leaving streaks where it attacks the lichen further down the stone. So it's much better to start at the bottom of the stone and work your way up. And you just have to keep applying D2. Doesn't suds up very much, but you can tell when you've gotten a lot of the lichen off. Use your brush, keep it clean, your bucket of water ends up quite mucky in the end, but again, this stone cleaned up quite beautifully. And this is Daniel Morrison, and I guess the second wife, because it is Daniel Morrison, but it says his wife Mary on his stone as well. So again, big challenge. He died in 1898, and here how filthy it was with the black lichen, but it cleaned up quite well again, really, really beautifully. So here they are a couple of weeks ago, so a year plus later, still looking very nice. Another stone that was cleaned was Rose Margaret Russell. She was an infant, kind of sad, and a beautiful rose pattern at the top of the stone. So it was nice to get that cleaned up. And I think the bottom cleaned up quite well too, the marble base, some of that really heavy black lichen. Maybe if we go back a second time or do the test where you spray the D2 on and let it sit there for a week or 3 weeks and go back and see what it's gonna, how good it reacts. But that was a beautiful stone worth doing. The gravestone of Thomas Henry Russell. Again, this was a challenging one. The left is the before picture, the right is the after picture. Didn't clean up really well. So it could have been that the stone is very mottled, very, it's too porous. Maybe it's worth trying to clean it again. You can read it better, but another challenging stone. This is the stone of Catherine Pottenberg and Frederick Pottenberg. Before and after photos, I cleaned this stone so I can attest to it. It wasn't terribly dirty, and you just spent some time scrubbing away at it. I masked out that photographic area. It's interesting. I don't know if there's any other stones in the Rhinebeck Cemetery that have the photo inserts, but when I traveled in Europe, I noticed that was common in some countries. I always found it kind of creepy. And I wasn't sure you could see her, but on the right, you can see that there's a portrait in there. And here's what the stone looks like a couple of weeks ago or 10 days ago. So it's still in beautiful condition, both of them. And here, her little photograph came out quite nicely that day with the sun shining on the stone. So I hope she's happy with her nice clean stone. These are the stones that were the challenge, and that first photo of me standing there smiling at them. So you can see how dirty they were. But again, they cleaned up. There's the after picture. What I was very sad to see, this was just taken actually a week ago, and I was shocked to see the stone on the right-hand side has fallen over. It's broken off. I asked Beverly about it, told her about it, and stood it up behind the middle stone and told the caretaker of the cemetery about it as well. Could have been hit by a mower or who knows, but it certainly was in good condition when we cleaned it in September of 2019. This is the gravestone of Reverend William Mink. He died in 1833. He was an early Methodist minister here in Rhinebeck. His inscription reads that he was aged 60 years, 5 months, and 29 days. And it occurred to me why they put those details on it, because they don't have a birth date on it, but you could work backward with his years, his months, his days, and figure out when he was born. That was how his stone was found. It's in the ground, but it's leaning like that. When it was pulled out of the ground, it was broken off. So here it is laying on top of the two other pieces. I apologize for that being a little blurry, but you can see how much of the stone we saw above ground is a little less than half of the length of the full stone. So that needed to be epoxied, repaired, and of course the professionals with us did that day. So here it is. It's been epoxied together. It's got a strap on it to tight, to hold it well in place while it's going to dry. So you can see the overall length of the stone. What you could see above ground is all that dark stone. So again, less than half of it is above ground. Somebody had to dig quite a big hole to get it back into. And so here it is put back in the ground straight. And here it is after it was cleaned. So this was a little over a year ago when it got cleaned. And here it is a year later. So it is still looking very nice and clean. This stone is Katherine Mills. She died in 1812, and it refers to her husband, Henry, who died in 1819. This stone needed to be repaired as well. So this is the one of the preservationists just cleaning the edge off well with water and a soft bristled brush to get a nice clean area to apply the epoxy and get it fixed. Here it is back in the ground on the right. Henry's off on the left, Katherine's on the right. You could see again how much of the stone is underground versus above ground. And then the stones were cleaned up fairly well. And that's what they look like today, actually, this month. This is the stone of Elizabeth Quick. What was interesting about this, she died in 1869. It was found leaning up against this other stone. So it had to be dug up, and it was quite buried. And only this top bit was visible. When it was dug up by the professional that we had there, this was the full length of the stone. So again, it's like an iceberg. Really, a third of it was above the ground and the rest of it's below ground. So he's done a good epoxy fix. He's got it clamped in place to dry. We were having a little drizzly weather that day. He wraps it in plastic to let the epoxy cure and keep it dry. And then here it is today. That stone did not get clean. So There's one that's at the top of our list to finish doing. It got repaired and put back in the ground, but it did not get cleaned yet. You can see how nicely the wording at the bottom shows up because that was under the ground when the stone was found. And this is an interesting shot. This is the back side of that stone, and the stone in the middle of the background is where it was leaning up against when it was found. So a year later, the stone, you can see it must have been leaning there for quite some time. The stone it's leaning against is very dirty, but where it was protected by Elizabeth's stone, it still remains quite clean. The stones of, excuse me, Katherine van Steenberg, the wife of Isaac Russell, she died in 1859, had a very ornate top, so that needed some scrubbing with the toothbrushes and the plastic and the popsicle sticks to get it cleaned up. Some of the streaks lightened. It wasn't, I'd say not a perfect job, but you can certainly say it's much nicer than the before picture. And here it is a year plus later. So again, still looking very nice. That very black lichen down at the bottom on the base, that's the lichen that's very difficult to get off. But there are patches of it up at the top where I think water sits on it, etc. But always a challenge. This is the backside of those two stones, Katherine's and Isaac's. And you can see just how filthy they were. And you kind of go, wonder how they're going to clean up. Well, they cleaned up fairly well. Again, the base had the most heavy black lichen on it, but the tops did the stones themselves did a pretty good cleanup job. And so here's Isaac Russell before and after. His edges needed most of the cleaning. The center was fairly good condition. I don't know why that was, the way the rain hits it or something, but again, much more readable, much nicer. And here they are today, side by side, and I hope they're happy with their improved stones. Excuse me. This is the gravestone of Elizabeth, daughter of Isaac and Katherine Russell. And before and after pictures, again, just a lot of lichen growing, not so much the black stuff, more the light green and darker green, brownish lichen. And it cleaned up very nicely with the D2 on it. And she was a daughter of Isaac and Katherine Russell. Died in, doesn't even say, or does it? But anyway, she was only, it looks like 1 month and 1 day, so it's rather sad. Died in 1830, maybe 31. It's been chipped away on that corner of the stone, the upper right corner, but it looks like 1831. Then we have the Briggs family. This is Katherine and Margaret Briggs. On the left, you've got Richard Briggs. So on the cleanup day, this nice lady tackled the stones, and there she is wetting the stone from the bottom. She's going to give that a good clean. Katherine died in 1873. She was the wife of Richard, and Margaret off to the right died in 1861. She was their daughter. So here's Margaret's before and after picture. So as bad as it looked in that previous picture and how much lichen there is on it, it cleaned up fairly nicely. She was only 22 years, 5 months and 18 days when she died in 1861. This is the backside of those three stones. Again, we didn't clean Richard's on the far right, but we cleaned Katherine's and Margaret's. So that's your before picture of the backsides. And here's your after picture. So they cleaned up fairly well. And this is your after picture a year after we cleaned as well. And here are the two stones, Katherine's and Margaret's, taken a week or two ago on a beautiful day, beautiful autumn day. This is a stones of Mary Jane and Katherine, children of the Richard and Katherine Briggs. So again, the Briggs family was all there. The top photo is the before picture. The bottom photo, the Katherine's on the right, has been cleaned. I think Mary Jane's on the left is in the process of being cleaned. So again, they came up much nicer than they were. Now, an interesting story with this stone, Sarah Elizabeth Garretson. She was the daughter of freeborn and Elizabeth Garretson, and she died in 1834. And again, it looks like it says age 10 months, 13 months, hard to read it with that lichen on it. It was found leaning up against this Ackerley stone, who is actually a family relative, I think, of the mother. And so the stone got cleaned, looks really nice after it was cleaned. In deciding where it should go, Beverly Kane told the conservator we were working with, I think it goes here. And when he started digging the hole to put that headstone back in, lo and behold, they found this smaller footstone. And it is her footstone. So it was a very good guess on Beverly's part, and just fabulous that they found that. Although it looks like it's sticking up above the ground, when they found it, you couldn't even see the top of it. So they had no idea it was there. It has her initials SEG on the top front. You can barely make it out there. But here it is. So it was put back in as a footstone at her grave when her headstone was put back into position. We do realize we put the headstone a little crooked, so we could fix that someday. But a nice, exciting story about the find of that footstone. And there it is today, close up, still looking quite nice, very clean. And here it is just shining in the sun on a sunny autumn day earlier this month. The stone of Mariah James. Mariah James was born in Wales, it says, and died in Rhinebeck in 1868. The inscription reads, Mariah James, born in Wales, October 14, 1793, died in Rhinebeck, September 13, 1868. Blessed are the pure in heart. And the 4 lines at the bottom, which weren't as easy to read before it got cleaned, say, strong is his strength who bore the cross for thee, strong is his strength who won the victory. Nor doubt nor fear shall then disturb thy breast, but thou shalt rise to everlasting rest. And that's actually from a book of her poems. She was a poetess, and she had a poem called Reflections, written 1834, and those are lines from that poem. She's in a book about female poets, and some of her poems are included in that book. And the Star Library also has a book with all her poetry in the local history collection. So it's interesting that she became a known poetess and died at a good age. She lived with the Reverend Freeborn Garretson family. And again, Garretson was the first Methodist minister in the area. The plot that Mariah is buried in was the plot that was purchased by Mary Garretson, daughter of the Reverend Garretson, and Mary and her mother, Katherine Livingston Garretson, donated the property to the Methodist Church that was the first section of the Rhinebeck Cemetery. I told you that earlier. They didn't want burials in next to the church anymore in the village. And then next to Mariah, that's the backside before and after. So again, it cleaned up very nicely. It's a little crooked, the base, but there was no need for us to dig it up to straighten out. The focus was to clean the stone. This is the stone of Mary Jenkins. And she again was a native of Wales, so perhaps she was a friend of Mariah. She died in 1851, and Welsh families came over to work the slate mines in the area. So there are a number of Welsh people in Rhinebeck Cemetery. So again, your before and after picture cleaned up nicely. The darker lichen at the bottom, you can still read it, maybe we can go back and try to clean some more of that off, letting the D2 just sit there and see if that really works. So again, here's the back of that stone before and after, and Beverly Kane smiling very happily when the stone got cleaned, because she was very fond of that in that story. And here's a close-up taken just this week. So again, you've got to get right down on the ground to read the bottom lines, but it is readable. It's up against the wall. It's in the first row next to the wall in that old section of the cemetery. There are the backs of the two stones, Mary and Mariah today, so they've still stayed nice and clean. Now I'm going to get into just a little bit of stone resetting. We didn't participate in this at the Rhinebeck Cemetery, but they showed us how it was done in Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn. So I'll just click through these quickly to show you really how fairly easy it is with knowledge and the use of a tripod. So this stone has merely fallen off of its marble base. So the men are propping it up using a crowbar, a piece of wood. They're then going to put strap around it, make a cradle. And it's amazing how I've never worked with a tripod and I forget what they call the chain component, but it's not heavy at all to pull. It's all counterweighted and it's wonderful. So here it is being raised off the ground. It's been down there for quite some time. So actually the front of the stone was nicely preserved, just dirty. When it's set back on the base, you use a piece of rubber, so a piece of rubber scrap, or some people they said they use tire flaps, truck tire flaps, but you just want to protect the two pieces of stone while you're positioning it into place. You lift it up a little bit more and pull the rubber out, but you don't want to scratch or damage the stones while you're doing this. So here it is being lowered back into place. And there it is back in position. So it just needs a good wash down and probably a dose of D2 to clean it up. We didn't do that. We were just seeing the replacement of fallen stones. Another type of stone attachment that can fall over is the pegged stones. The pins that were used long ago were iron, so you can see how rusted they were, and that will often cause the problem of them breaking off or just coming loose and falling out. So here's a nice marble base, nice marble stone, but they are going to repair it. So he used a drill to get the dirt out of the holes, clean it up nicely. Because the base was crooked and a little too deep in the ground, they dug it out. There's another good tool to know about. You use a plastic trowel, not a metal trowel, but a plastic trowel, because if you're digging against the stone or don't know that there's a stone there when you're doing some digging, it's not going to damage the stone like a metal trowel would. So the stone's been lifted out. They're cleaning it up and kind of fine tuning the stone. They've made a nice square for it to go back into, tampering it down so it's nice and solid and firm, flat. Put some loose gravel in, which makes it more stable than just dirt would do. And then it's placed back on top of that. Use a level to make sure you've got it as level as you possibly can. Now they're filling the dirt back in around the stone. They've got the piece of wood laying on top of the holes to keep the holes clean. Cleaning the holes on the stone that's going to be put back on the base, and just a picture to show you. So they filled the holes with a lime-based mortar, and you use stainless steel pins today that are grooved, much better than just the straight-sided pins. It grabs the mortar better. And so that got repaired. I don't have an after picture, but use your imaginations. And then another type of stones that had fallen over was a mortise and tenon stone. So it's just fallen over out of its base. It's funny, it doesn't look very deep to me. It's amazing that it would hold, but the weight of a stone is amazing. And also this base has sunk and it's crooked, so they're going to fix that as well. So again, using the tripod, cradle it, raise it up. There you can see the rubber mat that he's got it going on to on the left. Now they're leave it hanging there suspended while they dig up the base. And again, they are using a metal shovel, but doing it very carefully. There is the base out of the ground. The stone, again, because it's been laying face down, it's been fairly preserved. They don't have any idea how long it's been down, but just needs to be cleaned later. Putting it back into place, the base has been put back on the ground in the hole, and now they're setting the stone on top of it, and there it is finished. So again, fairly easy fixes for stones that fall off. They'll then brace it with a piece of wood, and it will be mortared by someone later around between the base and the stone. And the last stone that we saw them fix, just replace again, stand upright. Again, it looks like it broke off, but I think it was just a rough area where it was sitting. So you wrap your straps around it, raise it up. I was going to say, and wear heavy gloves. The other man wasn't wearing his heavy gloves, but when you're working with this type of equipment, you should always wear nice heavy work gloves. So they've got it ready to go up on top of the base. They've pulled out the piece of rubber. And when they dug away the area, they did dig the base out because it was sunk in a little more than they wanted. And when they were digging into the ground to create a nicer, cleaner hole, they found all this brick rubble. And it was explained that in the old days, quite often brick rubble was thrown into the holes in the gravestone. So they cleaned that out, and we didn't put the brick pieces back in. And here is the stone back on its base, raised up off the ground, looking good. And again, just needs to be cleaned up, but nicer than seeing it sadly down. This is a stone that's in the Rhinebeck Cemetery, Peter Quick's stone. So it has fallen off of that pegged base, and you can see the two rusted, bent pegs. The base is cracked on the left. The upper area of the base is actually broken off on the right. So that's a major conservation fix, and that gets expensive. But one thing we were shown in Brooklyn that you can do 4 flat stones to help preserve them. That's laying on the ground. The mower is going on top of it, so I'm sure it's not hurting it. We didn't clean that stone, but what they suggest for flat stones is to build an iron frame to put around the stone. And that way, when the mower comes along, it's going to hit the iron and not be happy with that, but it's not going to damage the stone. So in ending, as you can see, there's many stones that still need to be cleaned or repaired in Rhinebeck Cemetery. I hope you've found my presentation informative and that it's piqued your interest in gravestone cleaning and perhaps into minor restoration work. I encourage you to clean your family's gravestones if needed. You can contact the Friends of Rhinebeck Cemetery if you're interested in helping with a future gravestone cleaning day. That's friends at friendsofrhinebeckcemetery.org. And I didn't mention at the beginning, you do need permission to clean your grave, to clean graves. So if it's a family grave, you're giving yourself permission, that's fine. With some of the older graves, and Beverly Kane can expand on this for you because she is the one that was involved in that, but you actually have to put a notice in the local newspaper for a few weeks. And if nobody responds and objects to it, then you have the right to clean the gravestones. So something else to think about. Unfortunately, having to do my presentation remotely means that I can't serve you gravestone-shaped cookies and hot tea before you leave the Star Library tonight, but thank you for attending. Good night, stay safe, and stay warm.
Connie, don't leave us because we've got some questions.
Okay.
Frank Palea is asking, you showed us that picture that was embedded in the gravestone that you had cleaned. And Frank is asking, was that a daguerreotype? Do you know?
It looks like one. Beverly Kane might have more knowledge of that. It certainly looked like a daguerreotype. I mean, she died in, that was Pottenberg. Hold on. Pottenberg.
Connie, why don't you unshare, stop the screen share, stop the video.
Stuff. Sorry, my mouse isn't misbehaving. Okay.
I've also unmuted everybody. And Frank, actually, I don't know if Beverly, I don't know if you heard the question, and
I
is
think
Beverly
it is.
still-
I think it is a daguerreotype, but I am not an expert to
Okay.
opine
One
on
of-
that for sure. But that's what it
One
looks
of
like.
the, I'm sorry, yeah.
That's what it looks like.
One of the other questions from Frank was, are most of the tombstones sandstone and lime?
Most of them are marble.
Yeah, marble.
Yeah.
Okay.
And D2 works the best on marble, we were told. And if you read the literature about it, it does work the best on marble.
One of the other questions, how much, I'm sure it varies quite a bit, but what's your experience in the amount of time to, assuming you have D2 and you've got your brush and some water available, and you're out there at the cemetery, how much time should you plan on to clean a gravestone?
But it depends on the size of the stone, obviously. Reverend Mink's, which, you know, was big when it was out of the ground, was maybe 15, 18 inches tall. I remember I did that and it wasn't major dirty. So probably half an hour, 45 minutes front and back, it was done, I would guess. You could probably spend an hour on some of those bigger ones that needed a lot more attention. Beverly, do you have thoughts on that?
I think every stone is different. I mean, obviously every stone is different, but it depends on how dirty it is.
Yeah.
You know, I would say, I don't know, an average of half an hour, you think, Connie? An hour?
So certainly on the,
To do a small one.
yeah.
And is there anything, you showed several stones where the black lichens, particularly at the base of those stones, looked like it was impossible to remove, or is it just a matter of a lot of elbow grease and patience?
Yeah. Elbow grease didn't do it on the
Yeah,
day.
some of them, some of that black, it just doesn't come off.
200 years old.
Yeah, it just doesn't seem to ever, I don't know.
Beverly, we should test the theory and spray the D2 on and let it just sit there. Don't do anything with it, because I read more about the D2 today.
Right.
It just said some people just spray it on and leave it for a week to 4 weeks and it cleans itself. And it showed before and after pictures, obviously not with that horrible stuff. But
Well, you know, I did that though. I did do that the very first year. It was this one, I said, okay, I'm going to take this stone and I'm just going to spray it with D2. And I'm not going to do anything to it for 6 months. It didn't really do anything.
it-
I didn't really notice a lot of change, and it could just be that stone.
yeah.
One
did
of
try
our other questions commented on the fact that the portion of the stones that is underground tends to be, once you raise it out of the ground, tends to be easier to clean than what's above ground. What is causing the dirt?
Pollution. Moisture.
Yeah, it's air pollution and the lichen growing. Obviously, that's not going to grow in the dark underground. So it's protected when it's below ground.
That's good.
And the air pollution as well.
Right, air pollution. Yeah.
So do areas where I guess air pollution is everywhere, but in areas where the air pollution is less, tombstones tend to be in better shape.
Have to go to Antarctica and find out, or someplace. I don't know where it's.
It's interesting. I did recently go to a cemetery in Barry, Vermont, which is a pretty famous cemetery, and it's famous because all of the stones were carved by Italian stone carvers who moved to Barry. Barry is the granite capital of the world, and the striking thing is when you drive into the cemetery, it's very open and kind of stark looking because there's no trees. And all of the stones are just brilliantly white. But the few places where there's trees or shrubs, the stones are not so nice. You know, I mean, it's any kind of foliage, it's causing dirt.
Tannic acid?
And holding moisture, probably.
Yeah. So I think that also has a lot to, because most cemeteries have lots of foliage. You know, they have lots of trees, and you know, which makes them attractive, makes the cemeteries attractive. But I think that it doesn't do the stones a lot of good.
We have a question from Dwayne Ragucci. How many stones do you have permission to clean?
When we did the legal notice, there were 98 that we had on a list.
And how do you go about, what is the process? You need to put a notice in the papers, or you need to contact the descendants of the family, or how does that work?
We put a legal notice in, I can't remember if it was one of the local papers, whatever legal notice paper the town of Rhinebeck uses, because the town of Rhinebeck owns the cemetery. And I don't remember how many weeks it ran for, 2 or 3. And we listed every single stone and told everything we were going to do with each stone, and asked that anybody you know, that had any interest in that would contact us. Most of the stones we were requesting that for were people had died no later than 1840 or 50. So
Another question is, roughly how much does it cost to reset and repair an average tombstone?
again, that's what is the average, you know?
I mean, I know you guys are doing it as volunteers, but you also referred sometimes, for example, the Mary Miller
Not just clean.
situation, there had to be a brick area that had to be rebuilt. I assume somebody had to be paid to do that. Maybe that was also by volunteers, but
Yeah.
if we weren't talking about volunteers and, you know, I had a Fraser relative out there and I didn't want to do it myself and I wanted to hire somebody to do it, or ask the cemetery, what I suppose somebody would have to go out and evaluate it, but what is the range of cost to have that done? Are professionals available that would do it?
On the Mary Miller one, we hired a local mason to rebuild the foundation. We had to have a cemetery monument company come in to move the stone with a crane or whatever you call it, a big machine that moves the stone, because of course it's huge. And so they rebuilt the base, and we cleaned the stone, so that didn't cost anything. But rebuilding the base and having the stone move back and forth was nearly $1,000. And when we had our workshop, we had a gentleman come in who's a professional restoration. And the way he worked was he charged us, I believe it was $1,500 for a day. And he did a lot of work in that day, but we did not pay him per stone. We paid him for a day's work. And he did a lot, but I can't really say how much each one cost. Yeah, actually, I was right. There were two people working for $1,500.
No, but that came, no, but that whole thing came, that conservator came to about $5,000, I think, or 6,000, just for him to come for that day and a half.
No, it was about 3,000 for 2 days.
Okay.
Pretty sure.
Accommodation and
Yeah, with his hotel
Oh,
and everything.
well, yes, we had to pay. He was coming from Connecticut.
As- yeah,
It
was-
was his accommodations, right?
yeah.
In any event, it's not a whimsical cost.
No,
It's a serious financial decision. By the way, Connie, we've got a number of comments, including one here I see from Kirsten Green. Thank you for the lovely presentation. A lot of terrific information here, a lot of things that I was not aware of in terms of how gravestones can be brought back to life, and really neat. We do have some additional questions. Another one from Dwayne: is there any type of sealer that could be applied after cleaning to protect it? I know you were showing, a year after, 2 years after, it looked great, but my guess is that eventually over time, we're going to be back at square one, aren't we? Is there a sealer that could be used that
They
might make a difference?
putting anything on stone, I don't think, Beverly, isn't that right? I'm sure they didn't
don't
recommend.
recommend putting anything on it.
No. And I was told, I'm pretty sure at the first one I went to, the first seminar, was that the D2 kind of absorbs into the stone and it keeps reacting as a biocide. And I thought they said for up to 5 years. So I think it keeps stones
Wow.
fairly nice for a few years. I mean, let's check them in 10 years and see what it is. But think about those stones were over 200 years old. So
I have a suggestion of a possible protective coating, and I use it on some of my murals. It's called Graffiti Guard. And what it is basically is pure lacquer. It comes in a gallon. It's very expensive, maybe $100 a gallon. And it's thick like honey. And what I do on my murals is I roll it on with a roller because you don't want to spray it. It's very toxic. But when it dries, it hardens to almost a glass-like finish. And it would this stuff would go into all the carvings and the writing. So the whole thing would be kind of sealed in pure lacquer. Now I have like my Poughkeepsie mural, old Main Street mural, is 18 years old, and I put Graffiti Guard on that. And to be honest, it looks like I painted it about a week ago. It really works because if someone sprays spray paint on a mural with this Graffiti Guard, you can wipe it off with Windex. It's that opaque. So that, I think that would work. But the only problem is it's kind of shiny. It's a little glossy, so that might not be a finish that you would really like on a tombstone. But it would protect it.
One of the issues with a tombstone, unlike a mural, I would think, Frank, is that you've got indentations, and you need to be sure that those indentations are properly covered.
Well, you would go in with a brush and just make sure that the Graffiti Guard gets into every little nook and cranny, and then, but once it's on there, it sticks. It really sticks. I mean, I've used it on brick. I've used it on stucco, and it's there for forever. And it also prevents fading too. It prevents, it saves it from the elements, and it stops it from fading. Not that stone is not going to fade really. But anyway, that's just one material that could work.
Great, thanks for the suggestion.
Let me just interject though. I think that definitely you'd need to check with an expert, not me, but the American, I always forget, Gravestone Studies, or any conservator, they're very against putting anything on a stone, anything, except for the D2 to clean it, but not to put permanently anything to change the stone. So I don't know.
Well,
You know, it sounds like it could be great, but I would really be
Yeah,
very,
you would think they would.
very, that they would do that if that were an appropriate thing to do.
in any
But-
event, you would need the consent of the family to be able to do anything to a stone in the first place. And there may be policies on the part of the cemetery itself that may or may not permit that to occur. It might be appropriate here to mention that for those who may be worried that, who may be well aware that pollution is not going to go away, that there is an alternative, and there is something called the natural burial ground at the Rhinebeck Association Cemetery that does not require a tombstone, although a record is kept of who is buried where. And it is marked in those graves are marked in a variety of ways. So unless there are any other questions, I'm going to thank Connie once again on behalf of all of us at the Rhinebeck Historical Society and the Rhinebeck Cemetery, the Friends of the Rhinebeck Cemetery, for all you guys do to keep it a place where we can properly memorialize those who have been buried there. So unless there are any other questions, I'm going to say goodnight to everybody and thank everyone for joining us on this Zoom meeting.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Connie. Thanks so much.
Thank you, my pleasure.
Thanks for all your work on this.
Yeah,
We
it was
really
great.
appreciate it.
Full enthusiasm, clean, clean, clean.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you, everybody.